TikTok, it's time to rock. We've got a full house here, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a special show. We've got Hoss jumping in, telling us a few little bits and pieces of this great gig that's coming up. But in the meantime, before we get to Hoss, I've got to say hello to Johnny. Got to say hi to Jimmy. How's it going, guys?
What's going on? Happy to be here, buddy. Happy to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. Good to see you guys. And look, we said it before in the green room. Thank you guys for jumping on and supporting Hoss. Hoss is a big part of what we do here. This community that we have means a lot to us. And Hoss, it's always a pleasure, bro, to have you come on and share any project, anything you've got going on, bro. Thank you.
Hoss doesn't need our support, man. The guy's killer. So, but again, happy to be here.
Stop it, Jim. Stop it. Well, look, I'm actually so glad to have you, John and Jim, on as well. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about all things. It doesn't have to be a completely non-Eddie Van Halen show, because actually one of the things that I think will be super fun to talk about is all the similarities and differences between Yngwie and Eddie. And so, you know, we can throw that around. And Andrew, I just want to say it's very, very touching that, you know, even though the 5150 show is obviously an Eddie Van Halen show, but that we can do an episode on a different guitarist just because I happen to be doing a concert of somebody else's music, I think is really, really touching. So I can't thank you enough for that, because I think this will be a lot of fun. And, you know, we were talking in the green room backstage about how Yngwie is a pretty polarizing sort of a character, but he certainly keeps it interesting and keeps us entertained. And, you know, if there are non-Yngwie fans in the chat, which I imagine for an Eddie Van Halen show there will be, I want everyone to just speak their mind, you know, because as we'll get into, I've got some stories about Yngwie too, where he wasn't always my favorite guy neither. So, you know, but sometimes you just got to make it about the music and not about the personality, you know?
Yeah, and I get it, bro. And, you know, we'll always admit this, won't we? You know, we're just fans. We're just friends hanging out of the music, getting together. And not every one of us knows everything about everything that's going on. And I'm going to stick my hands up and say it. I don't know a lot about Malmsteen, so I'm here to learn and have a bit of fun. I'll say one thing, though, guys. That Christmas show that we did, when we showed those videos and we had to delete them off the main show because the whole show got blocked with Malmsteen. My gosh, that was a lot of fun when we were doing that. That's when you broke the story about you doing the gig, bro.
Really? Right.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that. Well, there you go. Well, you know, you're doing something right when you get blocked, right? That's how you know you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, so what they did is, it wasn't, and this is really interesting because the rock professor's in here. So it wasn't.
Yes. Hello, Simon Williams. Saw you in there.
It wasn't the music company that blocked us. It was the video company who had done the videos, who had ripped off the videos in the first place, had blocked us. So, we found that a little bit funny. But anyway, I think that's it for me. That's all my talking. Johnny and Jim and Hoss, take over the show.
All right. Well, I got the first thing. Wait, Hoss, that I never knew this. You probably knew this, but his real name isn't even Yngwie Malmsteen. I just found that out today after all these years. His real name is Lars Johan Yngwie Lannerbach.
Yeah, I was going to say that his name's not Yngwie.
His mother's maiden name, which was not even Malmsteen, and he changed added a couple letters to it or something like that. So I think he had a big plan about, like we were talking about in the green room before, his persona, what it was going to be. And I think that it must have all started, you know, at a younger age when he knew where he was going with this whole thing.
Yeah,
and you know, there's that old joke that he added to Yngwie J, to distinguish himself from all the other Yngwie Malmsteens.
Yeah.
So you don't
isn't it one of the guys from Spinal Tap said, and actually he's used this Spinal Tap quote in the what do you call it? You know, like the front 2 pages of his memoir, where he's got sort of quotes from different famous guitarists and people about him. And the Spinal Tap one is, you know, that he loves the way that he has to put in Yngwie J Malmsteen to distinguish him from all the other Yngwie Malmsteens in the world. And I love that too. You gotta love that. Hey, the birthday boy Brad Cook is in the chat. It's not his birthday today, but it was only a few days ago. So happy birthday,
Brad. Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy belated, Brad.
And there's a lot of other awesome people in the chat. Holly, Ed, Paulie. See Charles Green in the chat. I don't know. I have a funny feeling Charles Green might have some pretty good Yngwie Malmsteen stories. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but of course he did live in LA before he moved to Florida, so he would have been floating around a lot in Charles's world. So yeah, Charles, if you've got any stories, dude, we'd love to hear them. But you know, I got a couple of my own too, which we'll get to, of course. But
I think he recorded Trilogy in Los Angeles in Village Recorders. I think that's where he recorded the album there. Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, I've been reading his book, The Memoir, which for anyone, it's called Relentless. Of course it is. What else would it be called? For anyone interested in, finding out a bit more about what makes Yngwie tick, it's actually a really, really good book. And it's written very conversationally. You can tell that it's probably transcribed from audio interviews of him just talking, so it kind of flows and it reads really well. But yeah, we got Nina Ferro in the chat. For anyone that isn't familiar with Nina, she's of course one of the great singers of Melbourne, and I was lucky enough to have Nina sing with me for the Corner Hotel Van Halen gig, where she did some of the Sammy Hagar stuff like Dreams and Why Can't This Be Love, and yeah, and to which as soon as I get this Malmsteen show out of the way in 2 weeks, I promise the Corner Hotel video is going to be going up. It's going to be the very next thing I'm going to finish. So,
Hoss, she must be one of the hardest working vocalists in Melbourne, because if you follow her on social media, she's always got a project. Currently, she's doing the Judy Garland show or something like always busy.
Nina is absolutely, speaking of Yngwie's book called Relentless, Nina is relentless. She's tireless, and as she should be, because she's not only just the most lovely person, but she has the most incredible voice ever. And, I was so lucky that she was into doing the Van Halen thing with me, because obviously having a female sing some of the Sammy stuff might have seemed like a bit of a left field choice, but actually for me, it was always perfect, because I've known for years how Nina sings, and I just knew that it would just sound amazing with her hitting those high notes, so yeah. And we got Ben Coombs in the chat. Hey Ben, how you doing, brother? So I guess to start with, for anyone that doesn't quite know, in 2 weeks from now, me and the Melbourne Guitar Show people, and it's the first time Melbourne Guitar Show has happened since 2019, when I did the Van Halen thing, and that's obviously because of COVID and everything. And so when they hit me up and said, "Look, would you like to do something again?" I think maybe initially both me and them were figuring it might be logical to maybe tackle the Van Halen 2 record, And I thought about that for a bit, and obviously I would still love to do that at some point. But I just thought, maybe what would be really refreshing, not just for me, but for everyone's ears, is to do something really left of center and pick one of my other big influences as a teenager. And one of those other big influences when I was, 13 years old was Yngwie. And it might seem kind of like a disconnect and a bit incongruous that I could love someone as much as I loved Eddie Van Halen, who, him and Yngwie couldn't be more chalk and cheese. Eddie was like the smiling boy next door, like everybody's friend. Everybody loved him. He was an innovative guitarist, but really more than that, it was all about the songs. It was all about his brothers in the band. And then you've got Yngwie, who obviously is an import from Sweden, who was not about the band. He was all about himself, and pretty much never smiled on stage. You look at all the video footage of these live concerts. It's a lot of pouting and scowling and all of that cool stuff, but it's probably more along the vein of, say, like Motley Crue or Kiss. You know, I mean, those bands didn't smile either because it wasn't that kind of a thing. And, you know, Yngwie was always more like that. And he was, you know, while Eddie was wearing pink parachute pants and Reeboks, Yngwie was wearing tight leather jeans and boots, and with his hair fluffed up everywhere, and 18th century tassels on his jackets and puffy shirts and
crosses and bare chested,
and there was even a period where, like, most of his poster shots where he was wearing like the satanic pentagram and stuff like that. So he was coming way more from that sort of Richie Blackmore, Black Sabbath kind of like that world of music. Whereas you could tell Ed and Al were coming way more from the Led Zeppelin kind of thing, you know, where it was a bit more fun and it was a bit more jammy. But anyway, for anyone that doesn't know, I actually grew up playing classical guitar and didn't even pick up an electric for about 6 years. So classical guitar was my thing when I was a kid. And I think because of that, because I played all this classical music, when my guitar teacher, when I was 13, he handed me this cassette, which was the Trilogy album. So that was the first time I ever heard Yngwie Malmsteen was Trilogy, which, as you guys were talking about before, was released in 1986, I think. And so it must have only just come out, because when I was 13 would have been 86, 87. So it must have been a brand new thing. One of my guitar teacher's students had given this to him, saying, can you help me learn some of this? And he said, no, I don't think I can. But if you don't mind, can I give this cassette to a kid that I think is going to love this stuff? And because I'd already started listening to Eddie Van Halen, and that actually came from my first guitar teacher as well. Like, he gave me a cassette that a student had given him and said, oh, you got to check this stuff out. So only about 12 months later, he gave me the Trilogy record, and I just went, what the, like, I had pretty much the same reaction when I first heard it as what I heard when I first heard Van Halen, which is like that these two guys are just from another planet. You know, they were playing guitar in a way that was their own style. It was very unique. They were innovative. They, you know, even though their styles are completely different, they both created their own genres. I mean, like, neoclassical metal is pretty much, you know, it started with those early Malmsteen records, you know. And then, of course, we all know what Eddie did. I mean, he just, to my musical ears, Eddie was like a wild, electric, supercharged blues player, but with a sprinkle of classical and Mozart and stuff, which you can hear in the finger tapping, you know, especially in Eruption or whatever. You hear those finger tapping lines, they sound like Mozart piano pieces, you know. Whereas Yngwie was more the other way. He was like 80% Mozart and Bach with just a tiny sprinkling of blues. So they were kind of like the yin and yang. Anyway, when I was a kid, I just liked anything that was high energy. So it didn't matter what it was. It could have been AC/DC, could have been Eddie Van Halen, it could have been Yngwie Malmsteen. It didn't. I just was into anything on guitar that was high energy. And of course, Yngwie is definitely that. You know, it's really just super shredding like a classical violinist, you know. And so I sort of had equal parts posters on my bedroom wall as a kid of like Eddie and Yngwie. And I was telling you guys this in the green room, but for the benefit of everyone else, it really felt like I was getting my balanced diet of, I had the angel on one shoulder with the halo, which of course we all know would be Edward, with his perpetual smile and just, you know, relaxed attitude. And just every time you saw him playing live and every time you heard his music, it just felt like joy. You know, it felt like joy pouring out of him. But then, of course, on the other shoulder, I've got the little red devil, which is, you know, I mean, Yngwie was, we all know, was well influenced by the psychotic classical violinist Niccolo Paganini, who everyone at the time, he could play things on a violin that it could never been played before. Super fast, super crazy. And so they all thought that Niccolo Paganini was possessed by the devil.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think Yngwie sort of fancies that maybe he would like people to think of him a bit like that too. Whereas, as we know, Edward would never want anyone to think of him like that. They are really completely black and white. And so I was getting my classical fix with Yngwie on one shoulder, the little snarling devil, and then I was getting my heavenly fix on the other shoulder with Eddie, you know. And so they were my two guys. But the Trilogy album was the first time I ever heard Yngwie. So when the Melbourne Guitar Show approached me again and said, listen, what would you like to do this year? I thought, well, since I picked the first Van Halen record last time, why don't I pick the first Yngwie record this time? And then I'm kind of balancing my chi, you know, or whatever. But then when I was talking to the keyboard player who I worked with, Phil Tercio from the band On the Verge we did together for years with the drummer Virgil Donati, he sort of said to me, yeah, okay, cool, I can learn that first record. But Yngwie's first record is mostly instrumental and with a couple of songs with vocals. And I liked it, but Phil said to me, you know what, it'd be fun. Like, let's do this first record. But then after that, if it goes really well, let's do the Trilogy album, because that was the first album he heard. And it's just part of his DNA as a musician, as a young guy, you know. And I said to him, you know what? That's funny, because Trilogy was the first record that I heard too. And so we just started chatting about it. And then I just thought, hang on a minute, this is silly. We don't need to stick to any kind of, it's got to be the first album that guitarist ever released. We just said, listen, if Trilogy is the first time we ever heard Yngwie, and that was the thing that inspired us, let's do the Trilogy record. So that's why we decided to, yeah. So obviously it would have made more thematic sense to do Malmsteen's first record because we did Van Halen's first record, but actually Trilogy is the album that we were more excited by. So we just decided to flip to that. And for anyone that doesn't know that record and familiar with the songs, that was when Malmsteen's record company was trying to get him to be a bit more commercial. You know, it was later in the 80s. It was 1986. And it was the first time they even tracked all the drums and everything to a click. Hey, Christopher. The previous two albums, they had gone into the studio old school, like the 70s, and they didn't do anything to a click. They just jammed, basically, which is sort of why I do like those records, because you can feel that. You can feel that they're more jammed, you know? And so there's an energy to that I really like. This album was the first time that Malmsteen really was trying to go more pop. So the advantage that we also realized might be is for the people coming to the Melbourne Guitar Show, who are obviously, like, a lot of the guitarists will bring their partners or girlfriends or wives or whoever else. It's actually going to be a show with some singing and some songs, you know, rather than just 50 minutes of all over the place, you know. So
what I want to know, Hoss,
yeah,
are you going to wear those leather pants with
there you go,
with the hooker sides on them, you know, with the lace up, you know,
the
quick release, quick release.
The quick release, yeah. Look, I can tell you this, Andrew, that if I still had hair, I think I would wear the puffy shirt and the leather pants. But I can't think of anything worse looking than a bald guy wearing a puffy shirt and leather pants. So I don't think that's going to happen. But I
have a question for you.
Yeah, go. Yeah.
Have you mastered kicking picks into the audience yet?
No. I mean, I might try and kick one or two, but that's going to be more funny than it's going to be clever, because I guarantee you I'm going to miss them. But look, that'll be just as funny, really, you know. Because the other thing is
video.
I'm actually organizing this year the Melbourne Guitar Show, not doing multicam videos. So I'm going to try but I'm going to organize my own. So don't worry.
Good.
The show will get multi-tracked and videoed, and so that everyone that, you know, can't be in Melbourne can see it. But the other thing is that as much as the music that Phil Tercio and I grew up with on this record, so musically, like the Van Halen thing, we're taking it very seriously. But actually, in terms of the show, we don't really want to take it that seriously, because, you know, I mean, I've had my run-ins with Yngwie too. So You know, he's an interesting character. But I will say this. Wouldn't it be just a little bit boring if every single amazing guitarist was just super nice? Like, I don't know, like it gives us something to talk about, you know?
So were you one of those groupie guys hanging outside his hotel when he came to Australia asking him if he wants a donut? Were you one of those guys?
No, I was definitely not hanging out his hotel room. In fact, I've got a confession to make. I didn't even know about the donut story until recently. I never come across that, but I have now. I know about the donut story, and for anyone in the chat that doesn't know it, I mean, I don't know. Like, maybe it sounds like Johnny or Jim, you guys might know this story better than me. So if one of you wants to tell it, you're more than welcome.
Go for it, Jimmy.
I don't even know. I honestly don't know the story.
I just remember hearing the story about. Go ahead.
You can, for anyone curious after they hear us chat about this, you can Google Malmsteen donut on YouTube and see backstage footage of this. But he was I believe he was backstage. Though he was doing a gig either on the same bill as Pantera, but regardless, Dimebag Darrell was there, and they were just side of stage, like near where the guitar tech racks are and stuff. And Dimebag had offered him. He had a tray of donuts. So obviously Pantera were liking their pre-show donuts for a sugar fix. And he offered Yngwie a donut. And he goes, "Hey, Yngwie, you want a donut?" And Yngwie just absolutely saw red and went nuts at him, and maybe thought it was a dig on, how he was getting a bit puffier because he was drinking more. And he was going, "No, I don't like donuts. I don't like donuts." And he just absolutely lost it. And then there's a second part of the clip where they're backstage near the dressing rooms, and they must have asked him again just because they thought it was funny to keep digging the stick in, and he was still going on about how he hates donuts. And wow. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff. It's more Spinal Tap than Spinal Tap, really, But yeah. Hey, Fruitcake Tony, I see you in the chat, and he's saying Steve Rosen loves Yngwie. Well, that's actually really good to know, because I would love to try and get in touch with Steve and see if he and chat to him about Yngwie, because it would be a really cool thing leading up to the show that might give me some other perspectives. But
can I ask you guys a question? And we were talking a little bit about it in the green room, and it'll be interesting to see what people think in the chat too. So, we were talking about the way that Malmsteen interacts with his stage support, throwing guitars and kicking asses and just going completely mental. A couple of you guys here thought that it may be a shtick. It may be part of the act of what Malmsteen is. I don't know. Hoss, you're running this show, so give us your opinion. I don't think it's part of. I really think it's Malmsteen. I think it's who he is.
Look, I think I mostly agree with that. I think that the other thing is he's been the same way forever, and he just really hasn't. He's mellowed maybe like 10%, 20% with age now that but really he's the same. You see even recent interviews with him, and he'll still tell you that, there's only two man-made things that you can see from space. And one is the Great Wall of China, and then the other one is my Wall of Marshalls, I mean, he's the same guy. I think what probably is more common is that some famous musicians are naturally narcissistic or arrogant, and they disguise it to be a nice guy when they're being interviewed, whereas Yngwie is just never given a toss about that. He has, and in a way, as much as it's jarring sometimes. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager reading like Guitar World interviews with him, and there's a famous one where at the end of the actual interview about his tour and his new music and all of that, they did a blindfold test and played him a whole bunch of new guitarists' music that he had to comment on. And one of them was Pantera, one of them was Joe Satriani, one of them was Metallica. and he is brutal. Like, he's talking about Joe Satriani, like he goes, "Oh man, that guy has the worst right hand technique. It sounds like he's drunk, you know, blah blah blah." And then they tell him at the end, they said, "Well, that was actually Joe Satriani." He goes, "Oh no way, man! I can't believe that. I know Joe. He was having a bad day, you know." He's just brutal. It's actually, you can find the transcript on, if you Google it. It's Malmsteen talking about other guitarists, but I just think there's a look. If it was me, I would definitely not behave that way. I'd be too worried I was going to lose fans. But there's a part of me that admires that he's never put on a facade. He's never tried to be Mr. Nice Guy. He's just like, no, this is me, you know? Because I guarantee that there are other famous guitarists out there that would be as arrogant as Yngwie, but in interviews, they become Mr. Sweet because they don't want to ruffle any feathers. And, you know, hey, Mikey, Yngwie's just Yngwie. And even in his memoir, which is why it's a really good read, he's brutal all the way through, you know.
So he makes no apologies?
Funny. No apologies.
Really?
No. And he talks about how when he was a teenager, he knew he was that good, which is why he had to go to the States. He's like, yeah, I'm that bloody good, you know? Yeah.
Wow.
Definitely. I mean, there's so many great stories about, I mean, I didn't realize that.
Andrew, I agree with you.
On that trilogy tour that they actually had to cancel the tour like halfway through. I didn't know that until today. I was reading, I guess the singer on the album had left and Jeff Scott Soto came in at that point and sang on the tour. Then Yngwie ran his Jaguar into a tree, right? And he was in a coma for a week. I don't even remember even hearing about that, but he was in a coma for a week. And
so if anyone in the chat knows the details better than me, by all means, please weigh in. But the way I understand it is that, at that time, so the trilogy tour, I think so Mark Bowles is the singer that sang on that record. And oh my God, so if anyone hasn't heard this particular album, don't worry about Yngwie generally. But if you even just go on Spotify or YouTube and listen to some of these trilogy songs, the singing is, I mean, this guy's got one of the greatest rock voices that I've ever heard. And apparently, and the singer before this album was, as you say, Johnny, Jeff Scott Soto, who's another incredible singer. Yngwie was always really good at getting amazing singers, you know, because he wrote melodies that were so classical and operatic that you just couldn't have a regular singer. You needed someone that was basically almost classically trained to sing these things. But the Mark Bowles on the trilogy record is truly amazing. And then something happened, you're right. And then he called Jeff Scott Soto back to finish the tour. And then after that, he crashed his Jaguar drunk, of course, at super high speed into a tree or a pole. And he was in a coma. And when he woke up from the coma, he had no use of his picking hand at all. None. All his muscles had atrophied, and he basically had to teach himself how to pick again from scratch, which, you know, took 6 months or whatever, and put himself through physical therapy. The fact that he even survived that crash, because apparently the paramedics told him, and this is all in his book, of course, that this was long before airbags, and his head had dented a head-shaped curve into the steering wheel, which was made of steel. So, I mean, you can imagine how hard your head would have to hit a steering wheel to bend it. But anyway,
wow.
So it's quite an amazing story, but it also meant that, I mean, Yngwie talks in his book about how doing the next record, which was Odyssey, was actually a pretty horrible experience for him. He was not happy with Joe Lynn Turner, who came in to sing. And Joe Lynn, I actually really like his vocals on that record, because Joe Lynn Turner's not one of those sort of Bruce Dickinson kind of guys. He's more of a smooth, straight singer with a bit of gravel in his voice. And I think he sounds beautiful. And again, the record company were really pumping him to do some singles, you know. So he wrote some songs that were quite pop that did reasonably well, I think, certainly in the States. like Heaven Tonight was one of the big singles, you
That might
know,
be
and
his most popular song in this that people would know in the United States.
that people would know. Yeah, is Heaven Tonight. You know what though? There's a beautiful ballad on that record called Dreaming, which I actually think is one of the best written ballads. You know, would go in my top 20 ballads of all time. Not even in rock and roll genre. I just mean just ballads generally. You know, written by Diane Warren or whoever. That song Dreaming to me is in there. I think it's a beautiful song, and yeah, but he doesn't play songs off that record much because he didn't really like, you know, what he was going through mentally at that time. And I think, you know, he was drinking a lot, of course, back then as well, which I think he did for quite a while. He drank a lot for a long time. Really, those first 4 records were just made on booze, you know. That's the impression that I get. But you know, to me, I think that Yngwie's best articulation and technique to me is the Trilogy record. I think that the way he plays on that record is so fast, but yet so clean, you know, so articulate. The Odyssey record, he's still playing amazing, and the melodies and the lines and the phrases he uses are fantastic. But I can tell a little bit, because I didn't know when I was a kid that before that album, he'd had the car accident and had to relearn how to pick. I didn't know that. But I could hear something was different. I was like, there's something slightly feels sloppier, just a little bit about his articulation. And then when I read that in a magazine, I was like, oh, well, maybe that's why, you know. So yeah, it's
yeah, he's an interesting character too. I mean, I also read somewhere that his future mother-in-law had him arrested for holding her daughter hostage with a gun to her head or something like that. I guess that's his wife now. He's still married to the same wife, I believe, too. So
yeah, he actually brings that up in a chapter in the book, and apparently that's just a crazy mother-in-law, and that the police reports were. But you know, what's life without a crazy mother-in-law? Aren't they all meant to be a bit crazy? No, I think also probably Yngwie was, so let's just say that the mother-in-law was only a little bit crazy, not as much as reported, but also Yngwie was a wild man back then. So she just probably didn't really love who his daughter was with, you know?
Fair enough.
Right? So there's always 2 sides to a coin. So you know, you can put it all on the crazy mother-in-law, but I reckon it's probably 50-50. Maybe he didn't put a gun to her head, but maybe he was they're in the bedroom one day and he said, listen, if you don't be quiet, I'll shoot you. Or so I don't know. Who knows? So anyway, only Yngwie and her will know the real story on that one. But oh yeah, I heard a really funny story about him too. About he was on a plane with Frank Gambale, who most people would know of. You know, a fusion sort of a jazz fusion guitarist. I would have thought that him and Frank would have had a lot in common because actually they pick the same way. Like Frank does that economy directional picking thing. And so does Yngwie, which I never knew until about 3 years ago, which is why as a teenager, I gave up trying to play like Yngwie and poured all my eggs into the basket of, say, Eddie, you know, and people like that, or Steve Lukather or Angus Young, and really like worked on their playing. The Yngwie stuff I tried and tried and tried for years after I got that Trilogy cassette, and I just couldn't, you know, when on guitar, when you're working on something and you don't have it by a fairly long way, but something starts to happen eventually after a couple of weeks or a month even, where you feel like, okay, I don't have it, but I can feel like I could get it. Like something starts to click, you know?
Yep.
So whether it's Clapton Blues Licks or whether it's Stevie Ray Vaughan or whether it's Eddie Van, it doesn't matter who it is. There's something inside you that happens as a guitarist when you're learning how to play like someone, where you go, okay, I'm a long way from getting this right, but I can't, but I can feel it. It'll be right. With Yngwie, I never felt that. I just felt like with some of his medium speed licks, no problem. But with the really fast ones, I just went, I got no idea. I don't know how he plays it that fast. I just didn't know. And there was no one that was talking about Yngwie's picking hand technique, and none of my guitar teachers knew. That was never talked about in the books. I bought all the Wolf Marshall transcription books, you know, of the Trilogy album and the Rising Force album and all of this. But of course, the one thing that those books never, ever talk about is they've never got picking directions. So it's just all about what the left hand's doing. It never mentions what the right hand's doing. But what I learned the hard way, which is why I gave up, is Yngwie's all about, to play Yngwie's licks, you've got to do the right picking exactly, or the lick just doesn't work, you know. And to some degree, that's true of some of Eddie's licks too, actually, but much less so, because Eddie picked more alternate picking, you know, down, up, for the most part. Not always, but for the most part. Whereas Yngwie's pick is all over the place. There's almost no alternate picking ever unless he's on one string. And it's really, I only learned this because when I was doing the video edit for the 2019 Van Halen show, and I bought Final Cut Pro to do that, I thought, you know what I should do? I should download off YouTube a bunch of the Yngwie Malmsteen stuff where it's like close up on his right hand, and actually put it into Final Cut Pro. And obviously on YouTube, the audio is always out of sync by like, you know, a third of a second or something. It's really annoying when you're trying to slow something down and have a look. So I would detach the audio and sync it exactly. And then I would go frame by frame when it was on his right hand. And I learned that, I learned sort of to my shock, really, but I shouldn't have been, that every time he moves from one string to the next, he drags the pick. He never goes down, up or up, down. It's always down, down or up, up. And what that does is it cuts his picking motion in roughly about 50% for those fast licks. So for anyone else, like Zakk Wylde's a great example of a guitarist that is a very aggressive alternate picker, but that's how he gets that aggressive sound. Paul Gilbert's another one. All Paul Gilbert's fast stuff is alternate picking. Whereas with Yngwie, the reason it looks like his right hand's not even moving, it looks like he's just dusting with a feather, is because he's doing about half the motion. He's figured out how to do it so you can cut down extraneous movement. And once I figured that out, which was from, you know, during COVID, that then sort of reignited that thing that I felt as a 13-year-old when I was trying to learn the licks, but I just gave up because I just didn't understand how he was playing it. And but now after slowing it down frame by frame, I can see how he's doing it. I've basically tried to retrain my right hand just the same way Yngwie would have after his car accident. And because I never picked that way. So it's very, very foreign to me. So it's been a challenge, but it's getting there. I don't know if it's going to be at, I can tell you it's definitely not going to be at full Yngwie level in 2 weeks from now, but it's hopefully will be good enough that I'll be able to get through the Trilogy record and do it by having some fun, you know, with a smile. So we'll see.
That's do you find yourself on like, now that you've like been working on that technique, do you find that kind of incorporating it where you used to alternate pick before?
Yes,
you do.
I do actually.
Yeah,
sometimes, yeah, because now I'll go back to old licks that I maybe struggled with like a little bit, like say it could be a Nuno Betancourt thing or whatever, and I'll go, I wonder if I apply this to that, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, that's better. So I have to say it's been really fascinating because now I can dig back through all the tricky licks of mine, and one of the things that I used to work on a lot as a teenager was George Benson licks too, you know, and I found some of his fast lines really tricky. I went back and I looked at the same thing with what George Benson does with his right hand in Final Cut Pro, frame by frame. It's the same thing.
Really?
It's all directional picking. Yeah, the jazz. But I sort of knew that the jazz guys do that a lot. And the reason, and I used to have jazz lessons from a really famous guy in Melbourne, and he would always say to me, no, don't do this down, up. If you're going across the strings, you got to do it fluid like a sax player. So they would go blum, like a slur, you know, they would do it in one breath. So the equivalent on guitar, he would tell me doing in one breath is when you drag your pick down the string. So you go blum, like that. And it sounds more fluid.
Like a sweeping.
But the truth,
right?
like you're sweeping, exactly, like a sweep pick. Yeah. But the thing is that when I was 15, 16, getting those jazz lessons, I didn't want it to be fluid. I wanted it to sound aggressive. So that's why I didn't. But I should have listened, because it probably would have taught me how to play like Malmsteen before the age of 45. You know. So.
That's pretty wild. So when did you start like working on for this show? When did you really start buckling down? During the pandemic? Did you start that early?
Good question.
I started working on Yngwie licks just for myself about during COVID, say, right? Remember when I figured out how he was picking it, I would just like pick a lick from a solo, just one lick, you know, and I would say, cool, today I'm just going to teach myself that one bar, you know. But the concept for the Melbourne Guitar Show of doing it only actually got locked in fully, and where we discussed it, and there was, you know, a paperwork for it and stuff 4 weeks ago.
Wow.
So it's not. So I mean, in terms of pulling the band together and rehearsing and getting everyone to memorize the whole record and all of that, it's not actually that much time, because as you would imagine, the 4 other guys that I've had to call on to do this are pretty busy because they're good, you know. I'm so lucky. I've got like the 4 of the best guys you could ever imagine who are going to try and pull this off with me. And so I mentioned before the keyboard player, Phil Tercio, who I really grew up playing with. And for anyone that wants to get a taste of Phil Tercio's keyboard playing, which is truly, it's monstrous to me. It's like otherworldly. He was a keyboard player and you know, songwriter in On the Verge with Virgil Donati. So if anyone wants to see me and Phil playing instrumental, completely crazy stuff, like I guess you'd call it like Dream Theater, but with no vocals. Right, so prog metal or whatever you want to call it. I've got an On the Verge full live 90-minute live concert on my YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to see Phil playing, they can check him out there, and they'll be amazed, no doubt. Got an amazing drummer called Pete Drummond, and Pete does a lot of the big gigs around Australia. He's playing with you know, Jack Jones and the band Dragon, who had a lot of big hits down here. But also he writes his own music. He's got his own record out. And he's one of those guys that is it really keeps you in your space if you're ever getting ahead of yourself, because not only is he an incredible drummer in lots of different styles, but he plays guitar really great. He plays bass great. He plays piano great. And he sings unbelievable. And he writes his own material. So he's one of those, you know, not a triple threat, a quintuplet threat, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, quintuplet threat. Doesn't have the same ring as triple threat though. That just rolls off the tongue quicker, doesn't it? We'll say triple threat plus 2. How about that?
Right.
He probably plays like ukulele and sitar and all his, and saxophone and trumpet as well. I don't know, but and then we have an amazing bass player called Pete Mollica, who is playing in a fusion instrumental band with Phil Tercio. And so, but I'd worked with Pete like 20 years ago, but doing covers in a cover band at a pub, you know. And so Phil was like, nah, dude, you got to call Pete. Pete's got an extra challenge because Yngwie played all the bass lines on the Trilogy record.
That's right.
And a lot of them are doubling the guitar line, right?
Oh, wow.
So if the guitar line's like like that, the bass is doing the same thing down the octave. So, which is fine, except for Pete Mollica doesn't play with a pick. He's a finger bass player. So he's going to be fine because he's a monster, but he's got a little bit of extra work. Some of those things are tricky for me to play with a pick. I don't know how he's managing it on thicker strings with his fingers. But
he's going to do it all fingers then.
He's got to do it all fingers, but he's the man, and it's going to be great. And for vocals, with the unenviable task of trying to cop Mark Bowles' vocals on this record, I have the wonderful Chris Stark, who is, for anyone that's seen any of my Racer X tribute stuff on my YouTube channel, he's the singer of that. And Chris is just amazing. In fact, if you want to see something funny on YouTube of Chris in full flight, there is a video of Paul Stanley doing a Paul Stanley show, not a Kiss show, when he was here in Melbourne. And it just happened to be Chris Stark's birthday, and he was at the gig. And there's a song, I think it's called "I Still Love You." If anyone wants to Google Paul Stanley, "I Still Love You," Melbourne 2007, it'll come right up. And at some point, Paul breaks down the song, and he starts doing like a call and response with the audience, where he's going "baby," like that, and then he gets the audience to do it back. Well, Chris is in the audience, and then you just hear this voice going "baby," exactly like Paul Stanley, and Paul Stanley stops the show and he goes, wait, who is that in there? Anyway, he gets Chris to walk up the front, and then him and Paul Stanley have a vocal off, and it's one of the funniest things you'll ever see. And it happened to also fall on the night of his birthday, so it's immortalized on YouTube.
That's
so
cool.
If you want to see how Chris Stark's going to go with Mark Bowles, I think if you watch him trade with Paul Stanley, you realize I'm in very good hands. So,
have you started rehearsing yet? Like with the full band?
Oh, well, and before you answer
Andrew.
that, I just want to tag on to what Johnny's just said. So give us the nuts and bolts of what you're doing with the rest of the guys in this band as far as how you rehearse. Tell us, give us a bit of an idea of the process that you guys go through in that rehearsal sequence, because we don't get a lot of this information passed on to us, and I think some people will be interested, including myself.
All right, give me 1 minute. I need to quickly run to the front door, but because someone's been knocking. So I'll just mute my thing. If you guys can entertain yourselves for 60 seconds, I'll be right back. And they'll go into that.
We'll do a quick shout out. We'll do a quick shout out to people.
Wonderful. All right, see you in a sec.
If that's okay, guys. So everybody, thank you for joining us. We've got 32 people watching us, hanging out with us. Adam Roach, I'm just going to do a quick shout out in no particular order. Holly Lewis, thank you for joining us. Diamond Dave, thank you for the kind words. Simon, the Rock Professor, was here. We're going to be back later on in about 6 hours' time with the Rock Professor ranking the tracks, Savoy Brown. Brad Cook is in here too, guys. Please go and see a show that Brad Cook and I did yesterday with Nick Sevigny, talking about Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and we were treated Jimmy and John to some great playing by the guy. It was fantastic. Go and check that show out. Yeah. Jimmy, what have you been doing, bro?
I've just been listening to Haas talk about Yngwie. Oh my God, it's great.
I'm just mindful that we haven't heard from you, so jump in. Tell us what Jimmy's been up to.
I do have an Yngwie story, not directly, but I went to a all boys high school, Fairfield Prep, down the street here, and this was like 1985. I was probably a junior, and I fell into this clique where it was like guitar players and kids just learning how to play guitar and stuff, and like I said, it was an all boys school, so you had to show up with jacket, ties and all that, properly dressed. But we had this kid, and I'll leave his last name out. We had this guy Keith, right? And he had like long blonde hair, which was kind of frowned upon by like the Jesuits, the priests and stuff, but they can't do anything about it, right? So I had him in my algebra 2 class, right? And kind of years before, like I said, I was a junior, so like freshman year, sophomore year, it kind of got around that this guy was a guitar player. So we were like, because we were all learning how to play guitar too, and we were all like super jealous because at that time, again, this is 1985 or so, right? He had a Charvel Super Strat, all zebraed out, zebra paint job, the pointy. I probably would have murdered my parents for one, right? So we're in this algebra 2 class together, and I forget how it started, but like my teacher, he was like super cool. He was like the baseball coach, right? And he was teaching us about the Pythagoras, right? And he was like, Pythagoras, he was like a rock star. He was like, Keith, you play music, right? He points out this dude, right? It's like, Keith, you play music, like like who's the hot shot guitar player around this time? Like, Keith Richards, but he was naming like older guys, right? Like his
Yeah.
contemporaries, right? He's like who? Like Keith Richards? Is it like, maybe, the Steven Stills, like who, right? Just like, nothing against those guys, but they're not hot shots to my buddy Keith, right? That was Keith's like, probably Yngwie Malmsteen. And guys, my teacher's like, who? Is that English? Are you speaking English? No, Yngwie Malmsteen. He's like this guy out of like, he goes, oh, okay. And it was just like the funniest thing, because like it kind of we all knew who Yngwie was at that point, right? But when I was exposed to it, I think like the very first album that I heard was what's the second one? Marching Out? Is that what it's called? Marching Out. And so the first album that I actually bought brand new was Trilogy, and I'm with Haas. I love Trilogy. We were talking about this, in the green room, that was the very first album that I bought that was new from Yngwie. Now with me, I never really got into the whole thing of like wanting to play like that. I obviously I thought it was amazing and all that, but it didn't really speak to me as much as, let's say, like, I think it was. I think for me, I needed songs. Like Van Halen had like songs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, the talent was undeniable. And back then, people kind of like make fun of Yngwie now, but like back then, there was like really two camps. It was like the Van Halen camp and like the Yngwie Richie Blackmore camp. And Yngwie kind of just took that whole Blackmore thing to like the next level. And of course, Blackmore can, that guy can burn, no pun intended. He can still burn. But that was like my very first kind of like, exposure to like who Yngwie was. And he was in Alcatraz. He was in that band with Ron Keel before that. What was that called? I forget.
Steeler? He was in
Steeler.
Steeler. That's it, Steeler. Yeah, he was in Steeler and then Alcatraz. And then I kind of became aware of it because back then, like, he had Steve Vai, and Vai was kind of like an Alcatraz. He replaced Yngwie and then kind of like worked his way into David Lee Roth's thing. And, he was releasing like Flexible at the time around that. But yeah, when I was in high school, it was like those were the two guys, Eddie and Yngwie,
Did Eddie? I don't ever recall Eddie really acknowledging Yngwie at all. Yngwie's been asked questions about Eddie, but I don't remember really Eddie ever really talking about Yngwie or his playing.
Eddie's Eddie. He doesn't have to acknowledge Yngwie.
No, he didn't have. You're right, exactly. But Yngwie's been asked a lot over the years about Eddie. He's been he's been kinder to him in the last 15 or 20 years. I don't think he ever took shots at him, really. I don't, but I always got the feeling that Yngwie, was kind of above that back then, like above Eddie, like, because he thought he was better, technically better player. But he did a cover of a Van Halen song, I believe, one of those albums a couple years ago.
Yeah,
Light Up the Sky or something like that. He did
I think it was Light Up the Sky.
It might have been, yeah. I don't know. So, Haas, do you know which one it was?
No, I don't actually.
Yeah,
and
I think it was Light Up the Sky. Now that you
Eddie was still alive. It was like a Van Halen tribute album.
Oh yeah. It was one of those.
A lot of big names on it. I think what's his name? Billy Sheehan was on, I think, and those guys. Other songs.
Yeah, right.
I think Doug Aldrich was on that.
Right, exactly. So
yeah, I don't ever recall Eddie talking about Yngwie either, and just like all of you guys and everyone in the chat, I think I've read just about pretty much every Edward Van Halen interview, and I don't remember him ever really discussing Yngwie. And I don't think he was ever asked about it either. I don't think anyone interviewing Ed would have ever thought to ask about it, what he thought of Yngwie. Knowing Ed and how nice he was, they were so different that they weren't really competing with each other. I can't imagine that Eddie would have had anything but respect for his virtuosity, But I will say this. Having to learn all the licks off the Trilogy record, there is a very substantial, like healthy amount of finger tapping, believe it or not.
Really?
Oh yeah. And Yngwie didn't finger tap very much like, in fact, I don't think he finger tapped really after the Trilogy record almost ever. But at that time, which was 1986, which was in the height of obviously what Van Halen was doing, 5150 would have just come out. There's actually a lot of finger tapping, believe it or not. And so when I go to learn it, my first thing, of course, is always, well, it's how would he have played this? Because he wouldn't have finger tapped it, you know? And eventually you just go, no, this is the only way to play that is finger tapping. And so that's really, really interesting to find out that regardless of, look, I think Yngwie would have also had a pretty healthy respect for Eddie Van Halen, again, because they were so chalk and cheese. They weren't competing, you know. I'm sure Yngwie would have liked some of the radio success that Van Halen had, but really stylistically, they were just completely different. Different.
Sorry, Andrew. One last thing on that. I think for us kids that were in high school at the time, there's a competition there. But when you look at the number of records, I was looking at Yngwie's sales, and I was like surprised that they're not huge. Like he's not like a 50 million seller by any means or anything like that.
No.
So really, Van Halen was much more mainstream. It was a different league, as far as that. But I think us being high school kids, the guitar player, the gunslingers, whose side are you on? And I think that's where that all comes from. But I think for the general masses, I don't think that, people ever think of the two of them together, for any reason. No.
I don't think so either. And we can go through this. I want to get back to Andrew's question, but after that, I've got a list, a fun kind of a list of, and I might even do like a dedicated YouTube video on this at some point, because I think it would be really interesting for people. But because, I had the angel and the devil each on a shoulder, I really got to realize what some of their differences were, the differences are probably the more obvious thing. But believe it or not, as far as their equipment they used and stuff, there's a lot of similarities, like more than you would think, actually. So, they came up in the 70s from that same school of using whatever the equipment was available at the time. And at the time that was a Marshall Plexi, so, but we can come back to that, because that'll be fun. And I'll talk about that. But Andrew, you were asking about, the preparation and the rehearsals and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So because of everyone's schedules, and we had the exact same problem leading up to the Van Halen Melbourne Guitar Show in 2019. It's when, in any given city in the world, there's really only a handful of people that on each instrument that are capable of doing it. So once you've handpicked the guys, they're all going to be busy, and which these guys all are. So we have not as yet been able to have a face-to-face full band rehearsal, and it doesn't look like we're going to get one either. We tried really, really hard to get one in the next week, because obviously the show's only 2 weeks away now. And so what we're doing is we're using modern technology and everything. We're going to put it together what I call satellite style, which is where I put Yngwie's Trilogy album all into Pro Tools. And then I've marketed and tempo mapped all the songs. So the guys each have a copy now of that. And what everyone's doing is they're recording their own parts in their home studios. And I've got Chris Stark, the singer, coming around to my place in a couple of days to throw down some more vocals. And what we're going to do then is I'm going to create basically a play along, which instead of, now that everyone's kind of learned the parts, I'm going to create a play along where everyone gets a version of the album, but with us playing minus their instrument. So for example, Pete Drummond, the drummer, he can now play along with me on guitar, Chris singing, Phil on keys. And then, Phil can have his version where he's got everything but minus his keyboard parts. So that way, leading up to, it looks like we're only going to get 2 rehearsals, which is the week of the gig, which is, of course, in an ideal world for a task like this, I would want way more than that. I would want at least 4 or 5. But it is what it is. And You know, there's a great quote from Leonard Bernstein that says, you know, decent things are only achieved with a goal and not quite enough time. You know, and I think that it's a great quote, because having the deadline, I mean, if we had 6 months, we'd probably just fart around with it for 6 months, and then we'd probably still only do 2 rehearsals a week before the gig. You know how it is with musicians. So that's how we're doing it for the next couple of weeks. But the fun thing will be, it actually gives me an opportunity to and of course, we're going to take some video of the rehearsals. And so I'll put that up on my socials so people can kind of get a sense of, like, you know, hear it and see the people involved and all of that. But up until then, it's where we're basically just going to be playing along with each other in the studios. But I'm cool with that, because it also means that instead of having a 3 or 4 hour rehearsal where you got to drag all your equipment and it's super, super loud and it's, you know, all of that stuff, we get to do it for as many hours as we want, you know, and at a volume that's reasonable, so it's not killing your ears the whole time. And
that's a pretty brilliant idea, man.
That's a cool idea.
Brilliant idea.
And you'll have an album at the end. You'll have an album with all of you playing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's before. So before we even get, you're right. Before we even get to the show, we'll have a full existing re-record of the trilogy album. That's, you know, cool. And I think that's that's kind of fun for me too. Like, why not? I mean, we might not probably be able to do anything with it for obvious reasons, but it would be something cool for us to have. And you know, I mean, what's that?
That's a copy.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that. So yeah, it's so that's the preparation process. But I got to tell you, man, even though in my head, because I've been listening to this record since I was 13 years old, I can sing all the licks. Like, I can sing through the whole record. I know all of it as well as I know any Eddie Van Halen stuff. But technically, because I've never played this way before with that, like I was explaining before, with that right hand picking technique that I've got to relearn, some of this stuff is really, really kicking my butt. But, you know, look, it's a fun challenge. And what can I say? So yeah, go on.
So bro, can I just interrupt? So have you had to change string gauges because of this technique, the height of your guitar, how you would normally wear your guitar? Have you had to do anything like that?
No, and I'll tell you why. And this might segue pretty well into talking about some of the similarities between Yngwie and Eddie, right? So both of them used a similar string gauge. And although Yngwie now uses 8s, but we know Eddie used 9s, right? But the thing is that a lot of people will kind of, be disparaging with Yngwie about, oh, well, he's using 8s. That's no wonder he can play so fast and everything. But the thing about Yngwie is his action is quite high off the frets. So his philosophy is, for maximum thickness of tone, especially with that much distortion, is thinner strings but higher action, as opposed to a lot of guitarists, you know, they talk about that the thicker gauge strings gives you more tone, but they have a low action, and that kind of counterbalances it. But his whole thing is that his belief is that the higher from the pickup magnet you've got the string, the more tone that the magnet picks up. Because once you start to get it close to the magnet, it starts choking the tone. So anyway, they both tune down to E flat. So even though, I mean, I was saying Yngwie uses 8 gauge, I'm not going to use 8 gauge. That's too thin for me. And the truth is that I like consistency across the guitars. So for example, it means that, like, if I go from one of my Yngwie strats, which I can show in a minute, to one of my Eddie guitars, they're both tuned to E flat and they've both got 9s. So it's the same. So essentially the guitars, whether I'm playing like Yngwie or playing like Eddie, I get to play like Simon, because, I mean, I've obviously got my own preference for how I like the guitar to feel. And I just sort of want that to feel consistent. Otherwise, it's too weird for me to have to not only relearn how to pick with the right hand, but then also be using a crazy light gauge of string. It's too many things to contend with, you know, so if that makes sense. Yeah. So just for me, I've just made a decision. Like, I'm just going to set up the Strats with the exact same action and the same string height as I do with any of my Eddie guitars. So, and essentially, my guitar tech, Joe Occhipinti, he just sets them up. We've learned what my setup is, what my favorite action is. And sorry, guys, is that my phone that's dinging? So I can turn that off if that is. Sorry about that. Let me check my computer, what I've got on. I don't think so. Maybe it's not mine. Anyway. It turns out that the action that I like the best is actually just what Fender publish as their just standard string height action. That's all it is. And so Joe now sets up all my guitars like that, whether they're tuned down to E flat or whether they're standard tuning for regular gigs. That action is always the same. And Holly's saying, can you please play Malmsteen on the Frankie? Well, I think I'd go to hell for that. Certainly, Eddie's going to be up there. No, I would. It'd be pretty funny to do. I should do both. I should play some Yngwie on an Eddie guitar and sometimes I do. What I did when I was doing this Guitar Wars show a month ago is I was playing a Strat and I started ripping out Eddie licks and I thought to myself, yeah, I'm going to go to hell for this. That's for sure. But anyway, so action-wise, that's what it is. So they're both tuned down to E flat. Now, here's the thing that's really, really interesting, right, about their similarities. They both used a plexi with the volume on 10, and they both used some kind of a pedal in the front. Now, as we know with Eddie, he had his Boss EQ pedal, which was probably giving him a little bit more front-end push. And even if it wasn't because he was boosting the level of the pedal, he was certainly boosting the mid-frequencies and all of that, right? So, and then he had his Echoplex, which had a preamp in it. So there's no doubt that was adding some kind of front-end push as well. But you'd have to say, I would almost guarantee if you listen to the Echoplex into a clean amp, it probably wasn't fully distorted. And if you're listening to his graphic EQ pedal, that wouldn't have been very distorted either.
Wow.
So we're talking about a plexi that's dimed with a tiny bit of front end push. Now, Malmsteen was the opposite. He used a plexi that was dimed, but instead of where we know Eddie put all his tone controls on 10, right? Except for I think sometimes the bass control he turned down a bit if it got too flabby, which is how those plexis are. Malmsteen would have his tone controls around midday, but he would have his volume on 10. So the kind of sound that gives is, if you want to think about like a blues distortion.
Yeah.
So you plug a Strat in like that with the tone controls on midday, it sounds kind of like Hendrix Little Wing, that kind of sound, so like a little bit of bluesy distortion, but not crazy amount of distortion. Eddie got most of his by also diming the tone controls, and then the whole thing would just freak out, So how Malmsteen counteracted that was he was running a DOD 250 preamp pedal in the front end, but was very distorted.
Okay.
So in a way, they were doing the same thing. They were just coming at it from different ways. Eddie was using the amp for more of the distortion with a little bit of push in the front. Yngwie was using the amp with a little bit of push and then all the rest of the distortion from the pedal. And interestingly, we know that the reason that Eddie started putting humbuckers in his Strats is because the way he was diming the plexi, the sound was too thin with a single coil. So he started mucking with the humbuckers. But actually, when you use more distortion from the pedal and only a little bit from the power amp of the plexi, the sound doesn't thin out. So that's why Yngwie could get away with using the single coils. So they were doing it a different way, but they were kind of doing it the same way. Just, if, for example, the way I like to think about it is if Eddie's rig was 80-20, and by that I mean 80% distortion from the amp, 20% from the front, from his pedals, Yngwie was backwards. It was 20% from the amp, 80% from the pedals, and that's why one could use a humbucker and one could use a single coil, but it still sounded fat, So it's really, really interesting that, and the fact that essentially for the longest time, they really both played Strats, even Eddie's you know, with the humbucker, it was still a Strat body and Strat neck, you know. Actually, let me just pull up. I've got like a little fun list here somewhere. Where is it? Hang on. Here we go. Okay. I'll run through all the similarities while we're on similarities, right? So they both used a Strat style guitar. They both used a plexi with the volume on 10. They both love to play loud, super loud. They were both well known for that. Yeah. I mean, they both used a million cabinets. We know that. They both had one main guitar and therefore one main guitar tone. They were never those kind of guitarists like more sessiony guys like Lukather or whoever that would swap guitars from a Les Paul to a Strat to a this or a that. It was once they found their sound, that was it, and they stuck with it. The only difference is Eddie always used the bridge humbucker and Yngwie used both the neck and the bridge. Is pretty much the only difference there, you know. They both loved Italian fast cars. Except for Yngwie favored the Ferraris and Eddie favored the Lamborghinis. But that's to me is interesting. They both smoked, they both drank, and pretty sure they both did a lot of other stuff as well. So they got that in common, right? Now, as far as the similarities, that's about all that I can muster. I think that kind of covers it. So Strats, plexis, super loud, everything on 10. Lots of speaker cabinets, Italian fast cars, and the lifestyle that went with it.
Sure.
Then, this is more fun, is to now look at the differences, right? Because it's funny. To me, Yngwie is like a wild classical musician from the 18th century, but with a sprinkling of 20th century blues. And he does play blues licks sometimes. And even on the Trilogy album, I've gone, oh, that's just an Eric Clapton lick really fast, you know? Eddie was the opposite. He was like a wild blues player from the 20th century, but with a sprinkling of 18th century classical, you know. Yep. Yngwie pouts when he plays. Eddie smiles when he plays. Yngwie will launch his guitar into the air. Eddie will launch himself into the air. Yngwie wears tight pants and boots. Eddie wears loose pants and runners. Yngwie takes himself very seriously. Eddie doesn't take himself seriously at all. Yngwie, not humble. Eddie, humble. Yngwie was always more about himself as the virtuoso. Eddie was always more about the band. Yngwie was, his technique is characterized more by his right hand economy, whereas Eddie's was characterized more by his left hand pull-offs on the open strings and the finger tapping. So if you think about it, Eddie's innovation was more on the fretboard. Yngwie's innovation was more with his pick.
Okay.
You know? Yngwie would play when he's shredding more logical note groupings like 3s and 4s. So either triplets or straight 16th notes. Eddie was always doing odd groups of notes, 5s, 7s, 9s. And that's why he always said it sounds like he's falling down the stairs but landing on his feet, is because his licks were grouped in odd note groupings like 5s. Like all that beat it stuff, the finger tapping in beat it is all groups of 5s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, which is only, this makes it sound so wild, but Yngwie was more like doodly, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, more like a classical violinist, you know. Yngwie had the wide vibrato of an opera singer, which is totally true. That wee. Eddie had more of the vibrato of a blues singer.
Okay.
Let's see. Yngwie plays with a featherlight touch. Eddie actually played with a pretty aggressive touch. Yngwie plays with a very, very thick, hard pick with a very sharp tip. Eddie played with a soft pick, not with a sharp tip. Yngwie plays mostly inside the scale. So when he's playing harmonic minor or whatever it is, he doesn't really play many jazzy outside notes outside the scales. He pretty much sticks into like classical scales, whereas Eddie was always playing outside. You know, like you look at the lick at the start of Ice Cream Man, where he goes down the strings, where you get all these odd notes, or you look at stuff in Eruption, you know, with those wide stretches where he's playing all these notes outside the scale. So Eddie played way more like a jazz guy, whereas Yngwie played way more like a classical guy in terms of their note choices, you know. And that's about it. I'm sure I could think of some more, but that's just like a little list that I thought was really, really interesting about all their differences. And that's why, coming back to our conversation, why there's no way they wouldn't have had some reverence for each other, because really they were just so different, you know. But Eddie, as a virtuoso, there's no way he wouldn't have appreciated Yngwie's virtuosity just in a different style, and vice versa, you know.
Yeah,
So
pretty cool list.
so yeah, it's fun. But the funniest ones to me are like the things that got nothing to do with the guitar playing, you know, about how Yngwie will throw his guitars in the air, but Eddie will throw himself in the air, you know, stuff like. Yeah. Thank you, Greg Roberts. Yeah.
And Jimmy and John and everyone else in the chat, that's an open question. So who then, if Eddie wasn't a direct competitor of Malmsteen in the 80s, when Malmsteen was ascending, who was his direct competition? There was a couple of comments in the chat earlier.
I don't think he had any really at first, right? He was.
So are you saying, Andrew, who was Eddie's if Yngwie wasn't around?
No. Who was Malmsteen's direct competition?
I don't think he had any at first.
If Eddie wasn't his direct competition, who was?
Honestly, I think he kind of broke the mold. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, there are a bunch of incredible 80s guitarists that came out just after Malmsteen that you could say were probably grew up with him and were influenced. Like I would say Paul Gilbert, when he was doing the Racer X thing, was way more like Malmsteen playing than Van Halen playing, you know, because it was very fast picking and it was shreddy, you know. You know, it's funny. I never really think of Eddie Van Halen as a shredder, you know, because he really didn't, to my ears. He was very musical. And to me, when Eddie played something fast, it was because it added to the phrasing of the solo. It never felt gratuitous with Eddie. Whereas with Yngwie, it does feel more gratuitous. It feels like if you would go to see an orchestra play at a concert hall and it's a violin concerto, you expect the violinist up on the podium to be absolutely ripping, right? But it is kind of to show off. I mean, those violin concertos back then were written as a way of saying, let's just see what is possible with fingers on a violin fretboard, violin fingerboard, you know? And I feel like Yngwie came from that school. He came from a school where it wasn't a bad thing to show off your virtuosity because he was classically trained, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I think with Eddie, as we were talking about before, it was more about the song. John, you were saying, you know, more about the band, more about the party atmosphere. It was more about this all-inclusive thing with the audience, whereas I feel like Yngwie just plays to his audience. Yeah. You know, I feel like Van Halen included their audience, especially in the David Lee Roth days, right? You know, I mean, where he would just talk to everyone for like 10 minutes, you know? I mean, that would never happen at an Yngwie Malmsteen concert. So I just think you when people compare, I think the comparisons are fun, like the list I just reeled off. But truthfully, it's like trying to compare apples and oranges because they're coming from two completely different planets. Yeah. But you know, you've got you got guys like Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, who back in the day were doing the cacophony thing,
right?
You know, and I mean that was very, very heavily Yngwie influenced because that was more shreddy, you know. But I don't think that any of those people that came after Yngwie, whether it's Paul Gilbert, Jason Becker, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, I don't think Steve Vai was Yngwie's competition exactly, but I think that Steve Vai's another one of those guys that had his own sound completely. Yeah. Like, and Jim, you were talking about Flexible before. I mean, that was just sounded nothing like Eddie or Yngwie. You know, I mean, I remember when I first heard Flexible when I was in high school, it was like, okay, there's a new player in town. You know, there's a new gun. And not because he was out chopping either of those guys, because it wasn't about that. It was just he had his own vibe. He had his own unique thing, you know. And And I think, maybe you could argue Tony McAlpine was another guy that maybe was like Yngwie influence. He played more like those fast picking lines and stuff. But
like you said, all those guys came on after.
There was no one at the time when Yngwie came out that you could say that he was a direct competitor to, just like Eddie Van Halen. There was no one that was a direct competitor. There was no one finger tapping and doing harmonic squeals and dive bombs like Eddie at the time Eddie came out. He had that. Yeah. He had that world to himself, and I think Yngwie had his world to himself too. And I really want to say that. I mean, I equally grew up listening to Steve Lukather, Steve Vai, Paul Gilbert, Tony McAlpine. Like, I love all those guys, But I'd have to say, if you had to pick two top dogs that just revolutionized early 80s guitar, to me, there's no one higher than Eddie in one style and Yngwie in another style. And I think that all the other guitarists that came after were kind of combinations of the two. Like, I think you could argue Satriani is a good example of someone that played a little like Eddie and sometimes played a little like Yngwie when he was doing those long legato runs, you know?
What's ironic is a lot of people would say that Randy Rhoads was Eddie's competitor at the time on that scene there, but Randy Rhoads played more like neoclassical than blues in my mind. He was more along the Yngwie school, the early kind of school of that. I think, I don't look at Randy Rhoads as looking at him more as based in that type of music, more Yngwie than Eddie too. So I don't know how they're not even competitors really. Randy Rhoads and Eddie, yeah. I don't think,
No, I don't think so either. I think that,
each of these guys you've mentioned are all unto themselves like innovators in their particular styles. It's kind of weird because Vai, like you said, Yngwie, Eddie, they're all different, you know what I mean? After them, sure, some guys came in and were similar along those lines, and then you got people that are just hybrids of both of them, like Nuno, who's who's Eddie and Yngwie. You could tell he was heavily influenced by both of them, a hybrid.
Look, I got to say, special shout out to Nuno, because he was another one of those guys that when I walked into a record store and I had no idea who Extreme were, but that first record had just come out, and obviously whoever his record company were at the time, A&M maybe,
A&M,
were pushing it. And so even down here in Melbourne, Australia, like they were hanging the records off fishing line, so it was all around the roof. And I was like, oh, what's this Extreme thing? So anyway, I'm sure like you guys back then, I didn't need to go put the record on in the store. I'd just look at the cover, and if the guys look cool or whatever, and I would just buy it with my pocket money and I'd take it home. And then if I really hated it, I'd give it to a friend or something, But more often than not, my radar was like pretty good for you can tell from the album cover, and then you turn it over and you see a photo of the band, you go, yeah, I'll like this probably, Anyway, I took the Extreme record home and I was just like, wow. And so Nuno was actually another pretty heavy influence on me when I was 16. I used to carve his name into the school desks and all around the school, like out on the park benches and everything, where everyone would have their lunch. And I'm sure that all the cleaners and the teachers were just thinking, what's Nuno? Like they wouldn't have, like, why do we see these four letters like scratched everywhere? But anyway, actually, I should say that speaking of that Nuno and what an influence he was, he contacted me a while back about asking about some Van Halen stuff, which was just super, super sweet. And I posted on my Insta a couple of weeks ago, me at one of these Guitar Wars shows, just on my own, just shredding a bit of Malmsteen just for fun. And I got a like from Nuno, which was wonderful, So it's so yeah, he's a cool guy. I met him a couple of times when he was playing in Melbourne, but it's sometimes you meet someone maybe on a bad day, and so we never really got to chat that much or anything. But it's really interesting. Well, maybe what I should do is I've got a couple of the guitars that I'm going to use for the Yngwie show here. Maybe I should show people them.
Definitely. Excellent.
Great.
Also, Jimmy, you get new music from Nuno the Extreme coming out next week. I think I heard another little tease today coming. They're dropping a little bit at a time here. So next week, I think they're going to hear something new.
So Andrew, yeah, I'm just going to show the guitars that Joe Occhipinti has put together for me. This one's essentially just a Mexican Strat, but we put a large CBS style headstock on it, and we've of course put in Damasio HS3s, which was the pickup he was using on the Trilogy record. And so
no scallop fingerboard.
Nah, I can't do it's flat as a tack. No, I can't. I got enough to worry about without having to work out how to play with scallop fretboard as well. Right. That's going to be nuts. So this one, because Yngwie's original guitar of this color and style was called the Duck, so we call this one Ducky. And then this guitar, which has only just been finished, which is really special, is for anyone that's seen Yngwie's live in '85 in Tokyo live concert. That was the first time that I'd ever seen him, even knew what he looked like. Before that, I was just listening to the Trilogy cassette, And then I saw this come on MTV, and the very first song was a song from Marching Out, which I think you guys were talking about before, called I'll See the Light Tonight, which has got such a killer riff. But anyway, Yngwie normally doesn't play red Strats, but on this he was playing a red Strat. So it was the first guitar of his that I'd ever seen him play. And I was talking with Joe, my guitar guy here in Melbourne, and we were just kind of mucking around, and I was talking about how much that red Strat is burned into my brain, and he said, well, let's build one. And so that's what he's done, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And again, with the large headstock, we haven't put the Fender decal on it, and we might not, because it's not really a Fender. We made it out of parts, so it doesn't. Again, Damasio HS3 pickups. Now, for the keen eye, you will notice that is not a Strat bridge.
Yeah,
that is the original Floyd that doesn't have the lock nut to go with it.
So like a 2 or FRT2 or whatever they called it.
Yeah, I forget what the name of that one is, but it's like, I think it's like one of the most basic original Floyds.
No nothing.
And on that, the reason we put that on is because that's what Malmsteen had on his red Strat on the video. So we're talking before, and Andrew, you were asking about, was there any reverence between the two? Well, no doubt, once Yngwie saw Eddie starting to use Floyd's, that's why he would have put this on for sure.
100%.
Yeah. So this one's not battle worn in yet. It's going to need to do some rehearsals and stuff before I know. I've never played a Strat with a Floyd but no lock nut, so it's going to be interesting to see how it goes, but it sounds amazing. And one of Joe's little touches, he happened to have this little Ferrari emblem kicking around in his workshop, and as we all know, Yngwie loves his Ferrari, so we stuck that on there. But but that's it.
So which one will you play most of the show, on the yellow one?
Yeah, I think because everyone knows Yngwie with his it's basically like a faded Olympic white. Right. It's because of the nitro finishes. So yeah, I'll probably play this mostly because that's the Yngwie look that everyone knows. And obviously Candy will come out to play for a few bits, but it's she's going to be there probably mostly for moral support and if I break a string or any of that stuff. But I really would like to use it for a couple of songs because it would be Joe's done such a beautiful job building her. It would be awful to not give her a bit of a spank on the concert, So yeah.
I got a question for you. So what is the most what do you find the most challenging to play on Trilogy? What song, what guitar part is the most challenging?
I can tell you, well, look, it depends on the day and it depends what licks I'm working on at the time. Generally speaking, any new lick I have to learn is the most challenging one in that minute. But I will tell you the thing that is kicking my butt the hardest so far is the opening cadenza shred licks to Trilogy Suite, where he just plays them on his own, just up and down really fast.
Right.
and that's because he's directional picking it. I mean, I could probably show you. I don't know how good this is going to come out. So if you can't hear it, just let me know and I'll stop. But it might be worth giving it a crack. So I'll try and position it so you can see my right hand too. So the lick basically goes, hang on, I got to get this sit. There we go. That's the lick at about a quarter of the speed. Now, when I played it then, I don't know if you can see my right hand good, but I was just alternate picking the way that, say, most rock guys would do. So with Paul Gilbert or whoever, right, where you just go, so you just alternate picking it. Hang on. But what Yngwie does, which is what I'm furiously trying to teach myself, because it's really too hard to get at his speed, alternate picking. At least it is for me. I'm sure, you know, that alternate picking kings of the world could do it, but I can't. So he's doing it like this. If you can watch my right hand now, he's going. So it's down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, and then backwards on the way back. That's the one for me that I've got to spend the most time on. It's getting close. It's getting close, but I mean, for anyone that wants to after this wants to hear the way Yngwie plays what I just played, just YouTube Trilogy Suite, and it'll be the first thing you hear when you press play. And it just sounds like like that. It sounds like, you know, when Paul Gilbert would get the power drill out with the picks attached to the end. It sounds like that. Like, it is completely bananas. So, yeah, Robert Ranford saying walk in the park for Hoss. No, unfortunately, Robert, it's not. It'd be more fun if it was, but that's okay. Like I was saying earlier in the show, I knew this was going to be a challenge because Yngwie stuff does not fit under my hands as intuitively as Eddie's stuff. Yeah. But I thought, you know what, stuff it. Like, let's give myself a deadline and a challenge, and you know, if it's not note for note perfect, it's not. But that's okay. You know, it's about the challenge of doing it.
Bro, what a challenge. Because
Definitely.
like you said at the beginning of the show, you know, you could have picked Van Halen 2 and you know that album back to front. You know that album, all those riffs, all those songs, you can play them in your sleep. No disrespect to Van Halen already, but you picked one of the hardest albums.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one of the hardest for me. And then I don't think I fully realized until you know, I was talking to the Melbourne Guitar Show people, and they said, yeah, let's lock it in, let's do it. And then I had to put the band together. Like, truthfully, if any of the people in the band, like Phil Tercio, Chris Stark, Pete Mollica, if any one of them had have said no, they're not interested, I would have had to not do the show. I mean, because there's just no one in Melbourne that can sing like Mark Bowles, like Chris can. And as you guys would know, the other thing about well, actually all of Yngwie's stuff, but especially the Trilogy album and those first two records, his keyboard player is shredding with him like Yngwie, just the same as Yngwie is. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know very many keyboard players that can shred like that in that style. You know, I know some great piano players and jazz players and stuff that can shred, but not like that style, you know, because it's very particular and it's not the kind of thing a keyboard player would learn, really. But Jens Johansson just was amazing at being Yngwie's kind of partner in crime with the trading fours or trading eights, you know. And and honestly, if Phil Tercio had said that he was unavailable or too busy or not interested, I would have had to can the gig, you know. So
it's amazing that you were able to find everybody to fall into place to actually pull this off. That's pretty amazing in itself.
Yeah, I was very, very, very lucky for sure. I mean, I'm also very mindful of how much work all the boys have got to do. You know, it's a lot of work for me because we could play the songs, but then just kind of like shred the solos in the style of, like just play harmonic minor licks. But I don't want to do that. I want it to be so that for anyone that knows the record intimately and they know all the solos and the keyboard solos and everything, it'll be like the Van Halen thing. I want it to be like they're just listening to the record,
Authentic.
Authentic. Yeah. So that's why otherwise it wouldn't be such a stress and such a challenge, but just trying to, so my fingers can play some of his fast licks in the left hand, sort of no problem, but it's memorizing it, because I'm trying to memorize every little thing that he does during a fast lick, and some of them are just not that. I've never really played licks like that before. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a challenge, but it's going to be heaps and heaps of fun, and I'm really hoping we get like good video and multi-track out of it, because I really love you guys to see it.
Well, the other thing is that this album has so many notes that Haas, if you miss one, nobody's going to notice.
No, I would like to think that's true. So we will see. But you guys know what it's like being online. There's always someone that'll notice. Someone will say, "Nah, that bit wasn't right," or something.
There's always one.
The good thing is, I feel like at least like if you're doing Van Halen stuff, there's way more critics if you don't get it right. I feel like with the Yngwie thing, because just there's like, he's just obviously sold less records, he's less popular. At least I'm going to have a percentage less of the critics going, no, that's not how he played it. No, he didn't use that pick. No, that's the wrong pickup. No, that's the wrong guitar strap. Whereas with Van Halen, man, you got to be onto it.
So are you using a Plexi for this show?
I am. And, when Andrew gets back, what I might do, I've got all the stuff sitting here. What I should do is use my phone and maybe show you guys the Plexi and the pedals and stuff that I'm using,
Excellent. Definitely.
I'll definitely do a rig rundown video sometime in the next few days that I'll put on my socials, so you can see what, like with proper audio, and then I'll actually have a play of it so you can hear it properly. Right. I know over the streaming the audio doesn't, with the distorted guitar, it doesn't, it kind of goes weird, doesn't it? It sounds like it's underwater a little bit. Right. But certainly I'll show it off for sure. For sure.
So you have 2 weeks before the show. So you're right now. So you're really actually finishing this recordings, I guess, that you're gonna cut the parts out, and what you're doing right now, right? To send.
Right. That's the first thing. So that's the next 2 days.
Okay.
Is going to be just slamming down as much as possible all the recordings. I've got most of the drum parts from Pete. It won't take me too long. I mean, I could probably in almost one pass do all the rhythm guitar parts, certainly. Some of the solos aren't ready yet. I'm actually still learning some of the solos. Holly Lewis was just asking, what's the date again? So in Melbourne down here, it'd be March the 4th, Saturday, March the 4th. So like I said just before, all going well, and we get some video cameras in there and stuff, then I'll have a video to put up, which would be great. Excellent. But sorry, John, what were we talking about?
What were we just talking about? Oh yeah, well, so what you have on your schedule basically to cramp in here?
Schedules. Because so our 2 rehearsals, which are going to be all in a room together, face to face.
How many hours? How many hours are you going to be in there? Is it open ended?
Yeah. No, unfortunately not open ended. We've got to be like maybe 12 to 5, 2 days in a row.
So you got to be efficient.
So really, that's right. That's why I thought doing it where everyone records their parts in a studio along to the record makes sense, because it means that if everyone is just practicing at home for the next week, we really, with 2 5-hour rehearsals, we should be able to put it together, because the other thing is, and I can learn all the BVs as well and be singing along to my actual rhythm section, Right. Obviously, we could do that along to the record, but I think it'll give everyone a different feeling when they're at home practicing, when they're practicing with the way it's going to sound, with us. So that's the plan at this point. And then for me, after this next couple of days of recording everything in Pro Tools and sending it to all the boys, just practice, just lots and lots of practice. But I'm going to every time I kind of get 90% of a new solo down, I'll throw it up on my socials. So, and who was it? Was it you, Jim, that was saying Queen in Love? Was that you, John?
Oh, yeah. Do Queen is the Love, yeah.
Okay. I promise you that'll be the next one that I'll put up. I'll do that. I wasn't going to do Queen in Love next, but I'll do it next for you. You know.
Sorry, I got to put it on mute.
No, that's all right. That's all right. So yeah, I love the solo in Queen in Love. I think that's a really cool solo. I haven't actually hit that one yet, so I'm going to have to hit it soon. That's for sure.
Hey, Mark.
Very cool.
So Andrew, Haas is going to show us his gear. He's going to you going to use your phone, Haas?
Yeah. So Andrew, if I just click the StreamYard link on my phone you sent me, should be able to use that as a second camera, right?
Yep, no problem.
Yep.
So you ready, bro?
All right. Just give me a crack. Hang on. Yep. Got to open it in Safari apparently.
Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah.
Yep.
No, don't be sorry. Here we go.
Haas, will the show be a general admission so you can stand where you like? John ZD 351.
Yes, it will. It won't be. I think they still put some chairs. I know a lot of people commented on the Van Halen video. They're going, dude, what's with everyone in the audience just sitting down with their arms folded? But that's what those expo gigs are like. It's
Sure.
I'm guessing probably there is going to be chairs and stuff, but the tickets are general admission. Yeah, you don't buy. There's no different levels of tickets.
So you get there early and you get a better spot.
Exactly. So what I need to do though, Andrew, I don't know if I can do this, is turn the camera around. Hang on. Turn the volume down.
Correct.
I've muted the mic, but here we go.
I'll mute you from here too. No, you've already done that. That's good. All right, add to stream.
Yeah, add it.
And I'll do it on solo.
Okay. So there's the Plexi. It's a Sir SL68. And as you can see, the volume's on 10. Everything else is, I don't know if you can see that very well, but
yeah, you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then under it, I've got the Boss tube amp expander. I'll just pull back. There you go. And I'm going to be using that as like an overall stage volume because the Plexi's dimed, but also I'm using it for a little bit of post EQ and a little bit of plate reverb, which Malmsteen used a lot. Eddie Van Halen mostly used delays, but Yngwie mostly used reverbs. So that's the amp. And then if we go down, I'll show you the pedal setup is really simple. It's just this DOD 250 preamp, which as you can see is both controls on full. So he's dimed it. And the only other thing I've got there, which is absolutely necessary because that pedal dimed plus the Plexi dimed is so much noise that the background noise, which is like is as loud as the note you play, pretty much, is a noise reduction thing, the ISP decimator. And I've just got that set in the loop kind of the overdrive pedal so that it's responding to my guitar notes, not the background hiss. So whenever I touch the guitar string, the gate opens up, and whenever I'm not touching a guitar string, it closes down. So it's pretty much like that.
Wow.
And that, believe it or not, I mean, obviously my quad box and my 4x12 is not in here. It's in the mic'd up in the back garage. But that's pretty much it. That's the rig.
Wow.
That stir is sexy as shit, man. Wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a cool amp. All right. That'll do. Yeah, you can get rid of that now if you want, Andrew. Yeah, so it's a really, really cool amp, and that's what I've been using, of course, for any of the Eddie stuff I've been doing since the 2019 Melbourne Guitar Show, where I think you guys know I used a Kemper for that.
Correct.
The reason was I really, really wanted to try and emulate the Hang on. I think I've still got phone volume on. Let me just kill that. Okay.
So you used the Sir on the for the whole 5150 the last what you
Yeah.
just
So yeah, that's right. So once I get this Malmsteen thing out of the way, obviously my very next thing, which will only take another week or so, is to finish off the Corner Hotel video. I used the Sir for that as well, which came out great because, you know, I mean, John Sir just did such a great job designing that. And it's called an SL68 because it's 1968 spec, which I'm not sure if that's the 1200 series that I think Eddie's Plexi was, if it was that year, but you guys might know.
I think so.
I think so too. I think he sort of specifically built it to kind of be like his version of Eddie's amp, which I'm pretty sure that John Sir worked on at some point.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's obviously a great sounding amplifier, and I was very pleasantly surprised to find out that Yngwie used essentially the exact same Plexi. So it's sort of minimal messing around actually with getting the rig together.
I wonder how many Plexis Yngwie has. I mean, total. He must have.
I'd be surprised. Yeah, like in his house or in his garage or in his studio. I'd be surprised.
Or when he brings out tour with him, like we were saying before, he brings out there's 50 Plexi heads that he's got like behind him. It's just like for show, for show.
They're all, of course, they're all for show. I mean, at the size venues he's doing these days, I mean, I can't imagine how you could use more than 4 Plexis dimed. I mean, because he doesn't use an attenuator, so I mean that would be just deafening, you know.
Right. To me, it sounds like it's crazy though. I mean, if these are all these valuable, if they're real Plexis that he's got just like for show, just behind him there. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the chat knows that or not, if they are, but I remember seeing that on the stage. I was like, kind of like, I couldn't believe his part of the stage. It was just like a wall of Plexis, it was crazy, but I'm sure he's got a favorite one. I'm sure he has that he uses all the time. I would imagine,
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's some great videos on YouTube of him doing rig rundowns where, you sort of go through. I think these days, because Marshall now make the YJM Plexi, a lot of them would probably be hired in whichever city. They would just give them all the YJMs that exist in music stores in that city, probably. Right. But I think he would still travel with like his favorite 5 or 6 for sure, because, I mean, if one goes down or 2 go down on a tour, then you need to just be able to plug in a 3rd or 4th one that you just know are going to sound great, But man, I mean, as we know, Eddie used the Variac and stuff to kind of get the volume down a little bit, but Yngwie doesn't use any kind of attenuation. I don't know how his ears do it. It's crazy. Yeah, there you go. Show everybody that. I mean, that is just bananas.
How'd you like to have to unload that every night and load all that stuff back?
No, John, that's what they're putting together for the Melbourne Guitar Show.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
It's insanity.
It is.
I love how there's like no room for anybody else's stuff. Like no bass rig, I guess that's off to the side. Or
but look, I mean, back in the 70s and early 80s, the keyboard player would have had like 8 keyboards all stacked up around him. This guy's got one little keyboard he looks like he just got from the music store, and the drum kit's like really little. Yeah. It's hilarious. It truly, truly is hilarious, and that's why we love him,
And he brings that with him everywhere. I couldn't believe it when he did that. What was it called? Generation Axe thing with Vi. I saw him a few years ago, and with Nuno and Zach Wilde and Tosin. That exact setup there. The one whole side of the stage was all Yngwie stuff on the one side. It was crazy, and it was loud.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. I mean, I've seen him live more than a couple of times, but yeah, I mean, he is.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for the front of house guy because you just can't get the guitar into the PA. I mean, it's just pointless. It's just all coming off the stage,
You're right.
which is ruining the sound on all the vocal mics, on all the drum mics. I mean, it's just it's like we talked about before. For Yngwie, it's all about Yngwie. It's But I think that that can be funny as a personality, but when it comes to the actual sound on stage, it can start to ruin the sound for the punters.
Mhm.
I think
I gotta
that
be honest with you. He was the last one on, and I was like, okay, you know what I mean? It was like, it was like 4 hours long. This thing, I was like, and it was just so obnoxiously loud that it's just, it wasn't even that enjoyable. By the end of it, I was just like, I was happy when it was like, okay, good, I had enough. You know what I mean? At that point, I was like ready to jump out a window, I think.
yeah. No, I know, and I felt the same way last time I saw him in Melbourne live too. It was just screamingly loud, and at some point, I think all four of us here would say we like going to a rock show where you expect it to be kind of loud. Like we're not going thinking it's going to be quiet, but when it's so loud that even for say people like the four of us, or even I bet like most people in the chat, where it's just not enjoyable to stand and listen to it, even when you got a beer or a drink in your hand, that to me is when it's too loud, because I like volume and I want to be excited. Like I want you to kick me in the guts with it, but there's a point where it's like, I mean, the last gig I went to in Melbourne that was so loud that it was literally hurting. And, do you ever get that distortion in your eardrums where it feels like it's crackling?
Yeah.
Okay. Was when Extreme and Mr. Big came out and did the double bill in a club in Melbourne. And that was so loud that me and my mate, who are huge Mr. Big fans and huge Extreme fans, we had to leave after about 7 songs. We just went over the road to get it. We said we got to go. This is like it really hurt.
It's so funny. I had that exact same experience with Extreme, Jimmy, at the Chance where your band's going to be playing. And there, it was so loud that it was almost. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was almost like it was out of tune or something. It was like the sound was bending.
Like, it was bending space and time, like in an Einsteinian way,
Exactly.
It was so loud. I mean, it was by far the loudest rock concert I've ever been to. And as you would imagine, over my whole life, I've been to some very loud concerts. But this was
Nuno,
and then and Mr. Big as well. I mean,
is Nuno the reason why that?
I think
it's
so.
Loud?
Yeah, okay. Because Mr. Big were loud. I mean, even Mr. Big I would say were too loud. But when Extreme came on, I mean, it was like you could feel the sound in the air, like it was thick.
Yes,
like it was like the sound was just squashing your face.
Does Nuno have hearing problems? Do you think?
I don't know. I don't know how. I would say that not only would the band have hearing problems, but there's just no way that this front of house guy did not have hearing problems, because he must have been mixing with earplugs in. I swear, it was really.
I agree with you 100%. It was exact, and it was Extreme, and that was the loudest show I was ever at, and it was like deafeningly loud. I thought for sure the next day, I didn't think my hearing would ever recover from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It was. Do you know when something's so loud that it actually makes you angry? Like it changes your mood. Yeah, when we left there, we didn't just leave going, oh, well, that was a bit loud, and then had fun, had a beer. No, we were pissed off. Like, we were angry.
Like you were assaulted. That's how I felt.
It felt like we were assaulted. Look, Adam Roach is there. He was at that gig, and his ears are still getting over it too. Yeah, Adam, that was brutal.
Ed's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's
Mark Tanner was there, same thing. So, wow.
Isn't that interesting? Well, I guess they are called Extreme, but you don't have to be extreme with the volume,
Yeah, exactly.
Come on. Well, at this point, maybe like if anyone's got any, any last questions or anything in the chat, like maybe this would be a good point where I can address some specific questions.
Good idea. We've been live for an hour and 54 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a great time with everybody joining us. We had 32 people at one stage. If you're watching a replay, I'll attach everybody's social media accounts that's here on the show. Jimmy's, Hoss's, and John's. So go and follow everybody. Subscribe to everybody on our channels page too, please. And there's the first question.
The time of the show is going to be 4 p.m. on the Saturday Melbourne time, which I guess is then, what does that translate to? You know, I've done time conversions from Melbourne to the US and the UK so many times. You would think I'd be good at it, fast at it by now, and there's always something that trips me up. But
It'll
okay,
be 2
well,
hours
hang on.
from now. 2 hours from now? No, 4 hours from now.
Okay, so wherever you're watching this, will be 4 hours from now is when it would be live on the Saturday. So what time will that be for you, Jim?
Midnight.
Midnight. And for you, John? Same? Yeah. Actually, John, your mic's muted, I think.
Midnight, same as Jim.
Hey, same.
New
Yeah,
York.
so it'll be midnight. But unfortunately, Holly, it won't be live streamed, but I do promise that I know for a fact it's being multi-track recorded, and I'm in the process now of booking some video guys. So the guys that did the Corner Hotel were amazing, but they're not available, unfortunately. But I will definitely find some video guys to do this, because it would be crazy to not put all this effort into it and have something that, you know, to show everyone that's not in Melbourne, you know. We are actually also thinking already of putting together a slightly puffed up kind of bigger, because for the Melbourne Guitar Show, we're just playing the Trilogy album, which is about 45, 50 minutes, probably with a bit of talking and some solos and stuff like that. But we're already having so much fun just learning everything, like me and the other guys in the band as well. We're talking about doing like a big Corner Hotel style show where then we actually pick some stuff, not off the Trilogy record, where we might even just throw out on the social media, like what are people's other favorite Malmsteen songs. So like, you know, we were talking before about Heaven Tonight on Odyssey, or some stuff maybe off Marching Out, which I think, Jim, you were talking about this second record, you know, and we might actually just throw it out to everyone else, and whichever songs get the most votes, we'll add that into the show and record that, which could be fun, you know. John, that's very good. I'm not going to say anything about that, but that's something that I was thinking, not for the Melbourne Guitar Show specifically, but me and some friends of mine have been talking about putting an Extreme and Mr. Big show together, call it Extremely Big, but just for fun, just do clubs in Melbourne, you know, not necessarily for a guitar show or to film it or anything, but just to when we're not on tour, just to go and play and learn some songs, you know.
Haas, are you going to have your Kemper as a backup like you did last year or whenever that was?
I don't think so. I could do that. I'm sort of feeling like I won't. I mean, because I'm just using the Plexi, I guess the difference is this, that the way Eddie used the Plexi with everything on 10, that's really the only way to get that sound. Whereas because Malmsteen has his tone controls on about midday, it almost, you could make a normal Marshall almost do that sound probably. So, because like I said before, most of the distortion is coming from that DOD pedal. Mm-hmm. So I think if anything happened to the Sir SL68, I mean, I would be mortified, but there's going to be probably 2 or 3 other Marshall heads just waiting around. I could probably get through the gig all right, you know? So, yeah, I just, I really like the Kemper and I like using it. And obviously for what it does and the versatility that it gives you, and it's just a plug and play kind of a thing, I love it for that. But I just think that, especially for an Yngwie Malmsteen show, I just think people expect you to be using a Marshall stack. And I think if I did Yngwie Malmsteen with a Kemper or a Quad Cortex or something else, I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe people don't care that much, but I just sort of feel like it would be cooler to do it with a Marshall, you know? So, and, you know, in some ways, if something happened to the Sir and I had to quickly switch to another Marshall, the fact that people could see, okay, so it's not all about the head. Because truthfully, as you guys know, it never is all about the equipment anyway. You know, it's I might take my my LPD distortion pedal that I love, just in case the Sir goes down. I've got a high gain pedal in case I need it, in case I'm, you know, have to plug into a JCM 900 set clean or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else in the chat with any questions?
a reserved seating area, and the admission is donuts. I love it. I love it. No. I think what we did for the intro, our sort of walk on and quickly set up intro tape for the Van Halen thing was we just had I made a mega mix of all David Lee Roth saying funny stuff at live gigs, like the only people that put iced tea and Jack Daniels, but like all that stuff,
Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
Clash,
So,
or whatever.
is the Clash, baby? Yeah. I think for this one, I'm gonna. It makes sense to just do a similar thing. So we've got like a 5 to 10 minute kind of walk on tape while we can just check our gear and I'll just take bits off YouTube Malmsteen interviews where he's just saying ridiculous stuff about how all this stuff goes to 11 and one of my favorite ones I have to say is when the interviewer asks him about less is more, and he says, well that's just ridiculous. How can less be more? More is more. Everybody, that doesn't even make sense. And I just think that like having something that'll like make people laugh a little bit and realize that as much as Yngwie takes himself seriously, we're sort of doing this. We hope the music will be serious, but we're actually not taking it that seriously, So I think that'll be fun. So we'll definitely do that.
You gotta put the famous Yngwie line there. What was it? You released the fucking Fury. Remember on the airplane?
Yeah, the
ride?
Fury. The Fury, yeah. You released the Fury. Someone said to me, which is funny, that they thought that in the promos leading up to it, that because my middle name is Llewellyn, that I should call it Simon L. Hosford's trilogy, but which I think is pretty funny. But I just, for anyone that doesn't know, they'll just think I'm right up my own ass, So. They'll say, Hoss has finally lost it. He's putting his middle initial in his name,
Finally you lost it,
Yeah.
L for lost it.
Yeah.
We may refer to you as Simon L. Hosford from now on, though, right? As among ourselves here, right?
It would be so funny. I still think not everyone will get the gag, but I just love to go up to the microphone at the start and just like the way he starts his instructional video where he says, and I say, hello, my name is Simon Hosford. Oh, L. Hosford. Yes. But hey, so tell me, Jim, what do you got coming up, brother? Have you got some shows with Van Halen Connecticut coming up?
Yeah, I've got a show next Saturday.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna play next Saturday. We play. It's up in Southington, Connecticut. I don't know if anybody's, in the chat from around there, but we play this place like 3 or 4 times a year, and it's got a huge stage and it's nice. And I pros. I'll set up some GoPros and footage and stuff. But yeah, it's nice. Just, you sometimes we do like complete albums there, but this time it's just gonna be just like pretty much 3 hours of just assorted Van Halen. So it'll be fun.
Oh, awesome! 3 hours. That's cool. Yeah, and for anyone in the chat that hasn't seen Jim's band, is that they'll just find you on YouTube on Van Halen CT. Is that right? I got that right?
You can just check out my just type in my name, Jim Fonvis, and it'll pop up.
Beautiful.
Jim, did you book that show at the Chance in Poughkeepsie?
Yeah.
All right, Brendan lives in Poughkeepsie. Brendan, so it's when is that going to be? And
that's going to be October 7th. It's a Saturday.
Yeah, it's a place called The Chance. It's in Poughkeepsie, New York, and it's like a legendary old theater from the 1920s, like an old vaudeville theater. And it's like the Police always tell the story about how they played there on like a night in October, and there were 4 people at the gig, and they said they all said it was like one of the best gigs we ever played. We said we need to practice, so they played it. And they said to this day, people still come up to Sting and say, I saw you in Poughkeepsie in 1978 on the Outlandos tour. And he's like, there are literally 4 people there. And they said about 100, 50 people.
100 people have come up and said they were there.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a legendary old club, that place.
That's great. So when you said that was Saturday coming up, Jim, your next gig?
Saturday.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's my birthday. It's going to be my birthday. So, what better way to, being a kid and thinking that, on your birthday, I don't know, 40 years later, you're going to be somewhere playing like all these Van Halen tunes. If you told me back then, I would have thought you're crazy because it just seemed like so out of reach. It just seemed like that stuff was like from another planet. But no, it's. I did one for my. I played a gig doing the same thing. My band's been together for about 10 years. So I did one for my 50th. I'm going to be 55, so it's going to be my 55th.
Wow.
Day, so we'll rock it out and see. If you're chatting in the area, stop by, come up, say hi. If you want, I have people come up and play songs. If you want to come up and play the song, go ahead. My band pretty much knows, 60.
That's super cool.
I'm doing that next month, Jimmy, in April.
Yeah. Conch is going to come see me in April.
Right. Great.
We're working on something for Conch already to come up and play.
Oh, that's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah,
And
we get something cool. We got to show on. We'll one of the shows coming up.
Yeah,
we got something cool going on.
Awesome. And what about you, John? What have you got coming up?
I'm still recovering from my surgery. I got another month of that probably. I'm much better.
How are you feeling? Are you feeling all right?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. I'm on my Peloton bike here every day now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
great.
I'm doing pretty well and trying to avoid the winter out there. In New York. So it's been mild though. It's like 50 or 60 degrees here every day. It's crazy. It's just as like you guys had no summer down there. We had no real winter here yet. So knock on wood.
Okay.
So
that's good to hear, brother.
Hey, Helen.
Any other questions in the chat there? Anything?
I'm not seeing any. No, I think we must have done a pretty thorough job, gents, covering it all.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people obviously wishing well and hoping for some good results for the gig, Hoss. Clearly.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks very much. I just saw Chris Stark in the comments. I don't know if he's been there the whole time or just tuned in, but he's our singer, and he's just saying, if we're ever going to do stuff, he wants to do I Am a Viking. All right, done, Chris. Done, brother. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. So, Chris, I hope you don't mind. I don't think you were in the chat before, but I told everyone to go look up on YouTube, Paul Stanley, Melbourne, 2007. I still love you.
Cheers, Chris.
See, yeah, beautiful. And hey, Brendan, sorry I haven't said hello yet in the chat. Do you want me to go through and do a shout out then, Andrew?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. And I think we've kind of covered it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got nothing else I want to say other than fantastic, and hope it goes well. So if you want to do a shout out when we end the show, sounds like a plan to me.
All right. Well, Andrew, I've got to say again that thanks so much for suggesting that we do this Yngwie Malmsteen special episode, because it's been heaps of fun. And, obviously talking about the differences in him and Eddie and how they were sort of, they were my two gods when I was 13 years old and had all their posters on the wall. So, it's you got to have your cornflakes and your milk too, I guess, right? So, but and Jim and Johnny are always beautiful to catch up. I'm ecstatic that you guys could both jump in on this show. It's been really fun. Really fun throwing it around with you guys, and I think that Jim certainly, but I think even both of you were saying Trilogy was the first thing you heard, same as me. Mm-hmm. So I've been heaps of fun. All right, well, if you want me to, Andrew, I'll go through the list and do a little shout out. So, hey Sandra, see you in the chat there. R2R3. I missed one of your questions earlier, brother, but it was something about. I forget what it is. Anyway, feel free to DM me if you had anything that you wanted to ask. But good to see you. Helena O'Hara, of course, good to see you. Brendan B. Squared. Who else we got? Hugh Caldwell was asking if I've got plans to come to Scotland. There are plans afoot for touring of the Ozzy Van Halen show. We're looking at doing the UK, so I couldn't tell you 100% if we'd be in Scotland, but I would say it's very likely if we're going to fly all the way to the UK, we'll probably hit Scotland, at least one place. So, but that wouldn't be till later in the year, Hugh. But yeah, thanks for that. Robert Ranford, of course, Charmaine, all the way in the UK. Chris Stark, the singer of the Trilogy album. I'll see you on Tuesday, brother, and we'll do some. Who else we got? Charles Green, of course. Awesome to see you in the chat, Charles, of course. Janice, Mark Tanner, Holly Lewis, thanks for all the questions. Who else we got? Ed. Going up the list. John ZD351. Well, John, feel free to call me anytime. John's another Melbourneite like me, so hopefully I'll catch up with him before the show or at the show. And I think that's certainly all the people that are in the chat recently without going up a million miles. Oh, Adam Roach, of course. Hey, Adam. Yeah, that looks like, unless going back like miles, that's kind of it. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Oh, and Isa Frusciante over in Brazil.
Yeah.
So yeah, good to see you as well. Sean Zimmerman, Fruitcake Tony was in the chat. Nelson Rodriguez. So there are some people I missed. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's about it.
If you're watching
beautiful.
on a
Try to get
replay,
some
ladies
sleep.
and gentlemen, I will have Hoss's YouTube channel attached in the description here for you to make it easy for you to find him. Jimmy's YouTube channel will be attached here. I'll have John's social media accounts attached here as well. If anybody else wants to be part of our channels page, flick me a message, flick Hoss a message, Jimmy, John a message. We'll put your YouTube channel on our channels page and share whatever you want to do. Hoss, it's been a pleasure, brother, having you come on here because, you know, we keep saying it, but it's not a cliche. We really, really mean it. You know, we're about helping people here on this channel, and Hoss has been a big part of what we've done here for a long, long time, and we'll support anybody's projects. We've had a bit of fun with the subject, Hoss. We've had a bit of fun. We've learnt something.
I've learned a couple. I've learned a couple of things too.
And keep in touch, brother, with the show. And like I say, we'll share everything that we can. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to ask John Conklin to say some words, then Jimmy, and then we're going to give you Hoss the last words.
I think the dog wants to say a few words.
What's your dog's name, John?
This is Brody.
Hey, Brody.
Brody, say hello. Anyway, hey, Hoss, try to get some sleep over the next 2 weeks, all right?
I'll try. It's going to be minimal, but it'll be worth it. Thanks, I will.
And we're looking forward to seeing some clips and stuff like that. I can't wait.
I definitely will, yeah. So I'm definitely going to be uploading progress clips of bits of solos and maybe like a proper rig rundown where you can hear it as well, that kind of stuff. So for anyone that doesn't already and is not on my socials, I'm easy to find. I'm just Simon Hosford on Insta and Facebook. So
not Simon L. Hosford, just Simon
Hosford. No, I don't like fucking donuts. It sounded a bit too much like Schwarzenegger, but you get the idea. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Jimmy.
Oh, my turn. Well, first, thanks, Andrew. I mean, for including me in on this. Like I say every time, thanks for everybody that is tuning in. I can't believe anybody would care what I say about anything, but thank you. That's the
Not
truth.
At all, brother. Not at all.
Andrew, you got the, like I keep saying, you have the best, community or YouTube show, whatever you want to call it, on Facebook. I mean, you cover stuff from like, there's the Van Halen, but you cover blues and, classic rock, and you do the ranking of the tracks, which I love, and all this other stuff, your stuff with Brad and all that, and Simon and all that. So, speaking of Simon, I want to wish you the best. I mean, you don't need luck from me, dude. I mean, come on, you're a pro. But all the best. You're gonna kill it. I mean, come on.
Thank you, Jim. That's very.
Anyway,
that's very sweet of you, Jim. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you guys for being interested and being on the journey with me. It definitely makes it way more fun for me.
Can't wait to hear it.
Oh, and shout out to Simon Williams, who I know was in the chat earlier. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, we're out of here, guys.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
people.
Yeah.